preamble.
Okay, I'll let you know. One moment.
Thank you.
We're live.
Lovely. Thank you, man. Well, good evening, everybody. Just here we are again. This additional meeting was put in to look at potentially the hope for the documentation that we wanted. Has been here, and I see we've got an awful lot of it in our pack with us, so it's going to be an interesting meeting for us this evening. Not that they all aren't. So thank you for your time tonight, and if we can start off, Sam, with apologies for absence.
No apologies this evening, Chair.
Thank you very much. Item 2 on the agenda, any declaration of interests, please?
I suppose I should declare an interest, Chair, that should I be fortunate enough to be re-elected, some of the things are going to apply to me in due course.
Thank you very much. I'm sure Sam has got that noted for us. And item 3 on the agenda, minutes of the previous meeting. Now, I know there's a number of areas within the minutes that are covered by some of the items on the agenda. So if we can look at sort of, first of all, the minutes for accuracy. So page 3, page 4, page 5, page 6.
Just to note, under item 7, just to say, third paragraph down, it's WLGA as opposed to WGLA.
Right.
I know it's only a minor thing.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Have it right. What page was that on? Sorry.
It's item number 7 on the minutes.
Right.
Third para down, 4th line.
7.
I should have noted it before, but it suddenly leapt out to me. Apologies, Chair.
No, that's not a problem. So, Sam, are you all right with that?
Yeah, absolutely. That's all noted.
Not on page 4. Here we go. Thank you very much indeed. So again, page 5 for accuracy, page 6 for accuracy, page 7 for accuracy, page 8 for accuracy, and page 9 for accuracy. Okay. If I can just take some of the matters arising out there that I don't think are going to be not picked up on the agenda. Item 6 on the agenda, one for you, Gareth. Any further updates on the complaints, or are we just carrying on as normal? You said there were a number of complaints with since the last update. There's been one further complaint made to the Ombudsman concerning a community councillor not declaring a personal interest. The head of law and regulation informed committee that the previous 4 outstanding complaints were still with the Ombudsman.
Yeah, nothing further to update on that, Chair. If you like, I'll mention the new complaints then under item 5 as you've raised that, because since the last meeting we've had 3 new complaints submitted to the Ombudsman, 2 involving community councils and 1 a city councillor. The 2 involving community councillors, 1 involved allegations of disrespectful behaviour. The other case was actually reported by the clerk to the community council on behalf of the council, because the councillor concerned had been convicted of a criminal offence. So they felt that under the code, as a council, because they felt that the criminal conviction had brought the office of the member and the council into disrepute, they felt reputationally that they should refer the matter to the Ombudsman. So the clerk on behalf of that particular community council has referred that complaint to the Ombudsman. The third complaint involving a city councillor, the Ombudsman has already come back on that one and said he's not investigating. So I can probably give you a little bit more information about that one, given it's not quite as sensitive and could come back to you. There were 3 aspects to that particular complaint. The first one was a breach of confidence or disclosure of confidential information. What the councillor had done was included this complainant's email address in a circular email that he was sending around to various constituents. And this complainant didn't like that and said that he hadn't given consent to his email address being used in that way. The Ombudsman concluded that technically, including somebody's contact details within a circular email without their consent was a breach of confidence. But again, applying the two-stage test, he didn't think that breach was serious enough or that it was in the public interest to investigate the matter. So for that reason, he declined to deal with that aspect of the complaint. The second element was, again, the tone of emails being sent from the councillor and whether that was a failure to show respect for others. Again, the Ombudsman felt that the tone of the email wasn't rude or disrespectful, so he didn't uphold that part of the complaint. And the third complaint was the way in which the councillor was dealing with ward complaints. And what the Ombudsman concluded in that respect and reaffirmed something he said previously, which is, you know, the way in which councillors fulfil their duties is a matter between you and the ballot box. Ethical standards is about ethical standards of behaviour, not how good or bad a councillor people might think you are. So again, one or two principles I think we can sort of distill from these cases now that are being referred and in some cases declined by the Ombudsman. So at least we've had one ruling on that one. But to add to the list of outstanding complaints, we've got two more now to add to the 5 outstanding from last time. So we'll have to wait and hear what's happening with those. They all involve community councils.
Lovely. Thank you for that, Gareth. So that takes care of the one item I had on there. Are we content now that if we move on through the agenda, that the other items, the election training development review at 7, will be picked up at item 8 on the agenda, and so on and so forth?
Yeah.
Yeah. Good evening, Councillor Wilcox. Good to see you.
Yes, I apologise for my. I'm just seeing. Am I on mute? I probably am.
No, we can hear you.
No, I apologise for my lateness. I tried to get on, but they resent me the link. And if I could just say at this juncture, Chair, that this will be my last ever meeting of Newport Council as an elected member. So I'm very glad that I've come full circle, and I'll be leaving at the Standards Committee, which is one of the first committees I joined back in 2004. So it's a bit of a momentous evening, a bit of a sad occasion, but I'm in excellent company.
Good, glad to hear. And I suspect from the committee, we'd obviously like to thank you for your time with us and wish you the best of luck as you continue with the House of Lords to represent the interests of Newport for us. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. That's greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Okay, so if we come on down, we'll pick those up as we those items up as we go through the agenda. Excuse me a moment. Chair's announcements. I don't have any chair's announcements for tonight. Complaints. Thank you, Gareth. You've picked that up. Obviously, and item 6 on our minutes from the previous one. So if I can now pass over to Jill, All Wales Standards Conference feedback for us. Jill, I think you're going to do a little bit on that for us. Thank you for attending. I only saw Jill. I apologise if others of you were there, but I could only see Jill's name on there. So please don't take it that, you know, just because I haven't asked you about this. If you were there and you want to put something in with the feedback, I'm sure Jill will be happy with that. I just want to say thank you, Sam, because we did spend a little bit of time trying to get me in, for which turned out at the end of the day to be quite a short period of time. But thank you, Sam, for your efforts to trying to get me in there. And apologies, as I've said, if anyone else has went to the conference and wants to have any inputs with or after Jill, you know, please feel free to do so. So Jill, can I hand the floor to you? You're on mute, Jill.
Yeah, I wasn't quite expecting that, so I'm not fully prepared. But
no, that's fine.
Jill, sorry, would it be helpful if I said something first and then you could chip in later?
That would be brilliant. Thank you.
Yeah, I didn't realise you were there, Gareth, to be honest with you.
That's the problem.
I didn't see all the names.
Yeah, no, Jill can come in later in terms of her reflections on the day. Obviously, both Liz and myself were in attendance as officers. And for those of you who weren't there, it was very well attended, the All Wales Conference. At some stage, there were up between 80 and 100 delegates dialed in. So given it was a virtual conference with everyone dialed in via Zoom, it was very well organised. And I think it was a very worthwhile exercise in terms of some of the speakers, and very useful to learn from other experiences from other standards committees and chairs of standards committees across Wales. I'm sure Jill will comment on that later. In terms of the substantive speakers, obviously Richard Penn was there, and we mentioned his report last time in terms of his review of the ethical framework in Wales. So he was there to actually explain some of his recommendations and conclusions. And Nick Bennett, the Ombudsman, was also there to put his sort of reflection on enforcement and the regulatory framework. For those who weren't aware, not at the conference, Nick Bennett is retiring soon. He's leaving the Ombudsman's office. And the new Ombudsman that I did know at the time is Michelle Morris, who's the current Chief Executive of Blaenau Gwent County Borough Council. So she will be taking over from Nick Bennett as the Public Services Ombudsman for Wales sometime after April. So that was one piece of news from the conference. The other speaker on the day was a senior official from Welsh Government in terms of their response to the Richard Penn report, and this was probably the most disappointing part, if you like, of the conference, because it seemed to me, and it seemed to conference, I think, in view of the motion that was passed later, that there was no real appetite on the part of Welsh Government and Welsh Government ministers to legislate on the back of the Richard Penn recommendations before the elections in May. And we felt that was very much a missed opportunity. If you remember, we discussed at previous committees some of the recommendations there. Generally, the view was that the current Code of Conduct Ethical Standards framework in Wales was fit for purpose, and it didn't need major retuning. But there were some improvements that could have been made that I think everyone sort of endorsed and agreed with. So updating the code itself, and also including within the Declaration of Acceptance of Office of councillors an agreement to undertake mandatory training on the Code of Conduct. So there are lots of recommendations that we thought, or we understood, that Welsh ministers would legislate on and update the guidance and the training before the May elections. But I got the distinct impression, listening to the senior officials, that there was no real appetite to do that. That they would consider the Richard Penn report at their leisure, if you like, and whilst they agreed with most of the recommendations, there was no urgency in terms of implementation. Having taken the conclusion that the current framework was fit for purpose, the feeling very much was that the current Code of Conduct would not be amended before May, and the current guidance would not be amended, and nor would the Declaration of Acceptance of Office. So on the basis of that, the actual conference passed a sort of impromptu motion, if you like, or recommendation to Welsh ministers that we felt those recommendations should be implemented and implemented as soon as possible. There were some mixed feelings, I think, about some of the other matters that we reported to arising from his report, which was, more work being referred back locally in terms of investigations and hearings. But I think Nick Bennett's view was that he would still expect the Ombudsman's office to deal with the more serious complaints anyway. So he didn't think that was a major issue in terms of resources. But as we said last time, that was a longer term review by Welsh Government. The immediate changes were just updating the code itself and the Declaration of Acceptance of Office. But it looks like that opportunity will now have passed by, unless there is some change of approach within Welsh Government or Welsh ministers in the next month or so. It now seems unlikely that we'll have any changes to the Code of Conduct before May, in which case then any induction training will be based on the previous code. As we said, it hasn't been updated now since about, well, 2012 was the last one, but most of the code goes back to about 2006. So it just seemed a missed opportunity generally in terms of where that was going. So that was the immediate thing that I took from the conference. In terms of the other experiences from the participants, I think that the general consensus was the system works well in Wales. And there was a widespread endorsement of the conclusions of Richard Penn. So that was just my sense of conclusion, if you like, Chair, in terms of the proceedings. So yeah, happy for Jill to share her thoughts now.
Just get myself off mute. Yes, thank you for that, Gareth. Apologies, Jill. I saw your name on here and I thought you were doing the feedback. And as I didn't realise who else had been, hence my brief statement earlier on about it. But, you know, anything you want to add to that, and please, anyone else who's been from the committee and wants to say, please do. It's a shared experience. So thank you for that, Gareth. Jill, anything from yourself that you got from the day?
Yeah, I think you know what Gareth has said is you know, covers most of the points. It was well attended, which is, you know, and it's a good forum for people to discuss and network and hear what other authorities are doing. I learned quite a lot. The lady, I forget the name of the chair of Gwynedd Standards Committee, but she did a presentation at the end, which was quite direct. She's, you know, obviously members, particularly chairs of Standards and Ethics, I think feel that there is a need to update parts of the code of conduct. It is fit for purpose, but it is dated, and you know, we need to move with the time. So that was the general feedback. It was good to hear from Paul Egan as well from One Voice Wales, in particular around about training and what they can offer community councils. So that I found very interesting. Yes, and Lisa James from the Welsh Government. Yes, it was everything's been put on hold. You know, wait for the minister. You know, they're still talking about things. Guidance will come out, and there'll be more consultation. And yes, it is an opportunity missed, I think, not to have got certain things in place before the election in May. But yeah, I found it very worthwhile, and yeah, very useful. And the other interesting thing was that the 22 local authorities have also signed up to support candidates and the way that candidates are going out and canvassing and their behaviour during. So there's a statement there that is on the Newport website, I know, you know, just explaining what is expected of candidates when they're going out and canvassing and talking to the public, which I thought was a good thing as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Jill. Much appreciated for that. Before we move on to the next item, firstly, does anyone else go who would like to have some input into it?
Yes, Chair. I also attended.
Richard, please do.
Not much to add to what Gareth and Jill have sort of explained about the conference. There was palpable frustration, I think, at the end that there wasn't anything more positive from Dr. Lisa James from Welsh Government with regard changes to the code. But overall, yes, a very good forum. Very informative.
Excellent, thank you. And anyone else? Okay, in that case then, for those of us that didn't attend, any sort of points, observations for Gareth, Jill or Richard, if you think you've got anything you might want clarifying. Great, there we go. Thank you for that. And I'm glad it was, like I said, I did log in for a short period of time, and not knowing what the numbers were like, I did think there were quite a number of people there. So that's really, really promising to do that. Gareth, is this run as a yearly event? Because it's the first time I've ever seen, you know, anything about it.
Yes, it's been a regular occurrence for the last probably 10, 15 years. Obviously, it hasn't taken place during COVID. So for the past 2 years, there hasn't been a conference.
Right.
And this was the first virtual conference, if you like, that they've run. So thankfully, the technology stood up. And I think in future years, it probably will continue to be dealt with remotely. Because the problem has always been, and what you find with these All Wales meetings, I'm sure Councillor Wilcox would agree with this, it's always difficult finding a convenient meeting place. You always end up in Llandrindod Wells, which is probably equally inconvenient for everybody. So travelling arrangements are always difficult, particularly for a long conference. But I think if COVID has given us one thing, it's the ability to manage these meetings remotely now. So I think that will be the trend in future. There's appetite for this to be an annual event. I think even more so, I think there's appetite for having more regular network meetings, either nationally or regionally, amongst the chairs of Standards Committee and the Standards Committee generally. So I think these things will be a more regular occurrence in the future, but certainly the annual conference will continue, and probably in the same format as this year.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Gareth, on that side of it. Okay, if we move on now to item 8 on the agenda, draft statutory guidance standard of conduct. So that's the fairly meaty document, which is the report there. And this is the first time, and I must say, all the meetings I go to, I managed to get to somewhere that had a printer. And it's absolutely lovely just having that bit of paper in front of me and being able to flick over it and do my scribbling on it and go from there. So I've done that. So Gareth, can I hand back over to you for this part?
Yes, certainly, Chair. This is the one substantive bit of draft guidance that we've had now on the Code of Conduct. Having said that they're not going to change the Code of Conduct, the Local Government Elections Wales Act has changed some of the duties and responsibilities, particularly for group leaders and for standards committees. So as we set out in the covering report, Welsh ministers now have issued this draft statutory guidance on how these 4 additional statutory duties should be exercised, and they're inviting comments on the draft guidance, ironically by the 16th of May, which again, given it's after the election, seems a bit, the timing is not exactly ideal really in terms of a response, particularly as most of these duties will now take effect as from the 5th of May. But anyway, just to recap on the additional duties, we've mentioned this in previous meetings. Clearly, group leaders in future have a duty to promote and maintain ethical standards within their particular groups on the council. And again, I make the point in the cover report that a group for this purposes can be as few as 2 people. You have to have larger groups to qualify for a special responsibility allowance or senior salary, but this is about all groups on the council. And technically, if 2 of you decide to form a group on the council, then one of you will be responsible for discipline and for ethical behaviour within that group. So all group leaders of whatever group, however large, however small, will have this duty to ensure that their group members abide by the Code of Conduct and to promote high ethical standards. As a corollary to that, then obviously they have a duty to cooperate with yourselves as Standards Committee. And you then have a duty as Standards Committee to monitor how the group leaders comply with those duties. The final new duty obviously is the requirement for you to produce a statutory annual report. I think we've covered off that previously, that your current annual report for the most part satisfies that particular requirement. So first of all, in terms of the duty on group leaders to take reasonable steps to promote ethical standards within their particular groups, the guidance gives a lot of flexibility in terms of how the group leaders discharge those duties. It makes the point that it's not intended to be prescriptive, and it will leave it to the discretion of individual group leaders as to how they discharge that role. You can see that from the tone of the guidance, where it gives examples of of what group leaders may do in terms of discharging this duty. It's not a shall or anything compulsory in terms of what they have to do, but it's expressed as a discretion. And it's also clear that just because an individual member of your group breaches the code of conduct, that doesn't make you liable almost vicariously as a group leader for what they've done. But you do have a responsibility yourself in terms of your role as that group leader to promote a positive culture within that group. And you would expect, for example, group leaders to set a good example in terms of attending training sessions, for example. So there are a number of examples of what leaders can do to discharge that duty, attending training sessions, encouraging local resolution of disputes, and forming a good working relationship with other group leaders and standards committees. But as I say, Chair, it's very loose in terms of how that duty is to be discharged. It's not prescriptive in terms of what group leaders must do in every case. It's very much left to local discretion. And similarly, in terms of how they then work with yourselves as standards committee members to in order to fulfil that duty. There's a suggestion, a recommendation that they should report to you on a regular basis, either a formal report or a letter, as to how they're discharging that duty, and a suggestion that the chairs of standards committee may also want to meet on a regular basis with group leaders. So again, that's left to local discretion as to how often and how you meet with group leaders and how you expect them to report back on what they're doing. But clearly there's an obligation on you as standards committees to ensure that group leaders themselves are properly trained in terms of what's required of them. And the suggestion is that training must take place within 6 months of the election and be reviewed at least annually. And as part of the new annual report of standards committee, you will have to explain to council how you are discharging this additional duty now about monitoring the group leaders. So just picking up on that final then report, annual report of standards committee, like I say, your current annual report that we've done probably for the last 10 years, in terms of its format and content, it should satisfy the requirements of the legislation. We might need to look at the timing. I've mentioned that before. We tend to report from November to November. In future, we might need to bring it into line with the financial year, but we can look at that in terms of the work programme. The suggestion is you should also send a copy of that annual report to the Ombudsman, and also, and this is something new, that we should send a copy to each of the community councils in the Newport area, so that they can have a look at that. But apart from those minor amendments and tweaks to the annual report, our current reporting procedures should suffice. So in terms of the consultation itself, it's a very basic consultation questions in terms of open questions, and setting aside some of the Welsh language questions that you may or may not want to respond to. In essence, what they're asking you is whether the guidance is sufficiently clear and whether it explains both the group leaders and yourselves as standards committee members, whether it explains sufficiently what the new duties are and how you fulfill those duties. So it's really just open to you as committee now to formulate any comments you may have or responses that you want to submit to the consultation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Gareth. Is there I'm just trying to look through this now. Is there a time limit for the consultation close? And I'm just on the back page. I'm just
16th of May.
16th of May. Just seen it. Yeah, 16th of May. From there. So just with what Gareth has said there in relation to this document, as I said, it's a fairly weighty document, and I think we need to have some input into it. Otherwise, you know, what's the point? We've got this opportunity to have that input into it. I'm really glad, Gareth, that you said our report is generally okay, because I looked at that, ticked it off, and then you came along and said, oh, we might have to make some amendments. So at least we've got the foundation part of that. Obviously, the other part is working with the leaders to, you know, to make sure that they are doing what they're supposed to be doing, and we're doing what we're supposed to be doing. So if I could just ask, first of all, under sort of your guidance, your auspices, Gareth, if people want to make a comments to this as a group, would you prefer them just sending them to Sam and yourself? Or, I mean, we can discuss if anyone's got any immediately now they want to comment on, but for sort of, you know, if people want to have a bit longer to digest this, having had Gareth's input into it, you know, whether the comments will go back to Gareth or Sam. So let me put that on the floor. Anyone got any comments, first of all, that obviously that we want to have some input into this, and if you've got some comments now, I'm sure Sam will record them for us. But over to everybody, open the floor to it. Kerry.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, reading through the guidance and the extra responsibilities that the Standards Committee have, it appears to me we need to put in place a mechanism for Standards Committee and group leaders of dates and times of meetings and reports, and for the people to come back to us with any issues they may have. Interestingly, if the Act comes into effect on the 5th of May, yet the draft guidance comments are the 16th of May. Where does that leave us, Gareth?
It means the duty comes into effect on the 5th of May, and we're without any statutory guidance. Look, we have 6 months to deliver the training. It's an ongoing process, so I don't think it's fatal in that respect. I think what we need to be doing at this stage is planning, as you say, in terms of when you would want to meet with the new group leaders. I mean, obviously, you know, they will find their feet for a while. So we'll need to build that into the induction program for new members. But I think at this stage, it's a question of identifying, well, how you want to meet for a start. Would it be beneficial to have them at a meeting, a round table meeting or virtual meeting like this, to discuss things generally as opposed to a written report? Like I said, the draft guidance is not prescriptive. It gives a lot of local flexibility as to how you do this. So it's very much up to you whether you prefer to say to have the group leaders in to a Standards Committee meeting, say once or twice a year, to talk about issues and to talk about what they're doing to promote ethical standards. So I think there are things that we can do in terms of planning this and putting it in the work programme. But you are right, it would have been good to have the final guidance, before the 5th of May when the duties come into effect.
Thank you for that, Gareth, and Kerry, for that comment there. I will put it back out to the floor in just a moment, but my own personal thoughts are, I mean, we've got 6 months to, or you've got 6 months to deliver this training. So I suspect looking at it, any meeting with them earlier than 6 months isn't really a, you know, by the time they settle in, find their feet and have got the training on that. But I'm afraid with all the technology we've got, I still like that idea of sitting down with people face to face, and, you know, just doing the questions and talking that way around it, rather than, and I know this is, you know, an ideal way virtually. Myself, I'm very much in favour of face to face. That was just my part of it. Just look at some hands. Councillor Wilcox.
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, you know, speaking as someone with experience of being a group leader on the City Council for 4 years or so, I'm very pleased to see that this guidance is now there, particularly for the smaller group leaders, or leaders of the smaller groups, should I say, because unless you are the leader of the council or the official opposition leader, sometimes those other leaders are not put under the same discipline, let me say, than those of us who, you know, were leaders or opposition leaders. So that it's good that that it is now for all. That's very, very important. So everyone has that same responsibility. I think twice a year would be absolutely fine. I would suggest that you ask the leaders to submit a written report in advance and then use the time in the meeting to question them on that report. That's the kind of format, Gareth would agree, that's the kind of format when leaders would go, when I would go to the, which committee was it they used to throw me around the room, Gareth? I can't remember it. You know, the one that I hated going to, but I did. Was it?
That was the scrutiny committee, wasn't it?
That's it, yes. But I'd sit there and face them down. And so, you know, so if you've got something from them beforehand, you've got something to talk about. And I think twice a year, I don't think any more than that would be needed. I think twice a year would be sufficient. And could I also say that I think you should invite the group leaders separately. So it could be the same meeting, but they had a, you know, a separate block of time in your meeting. I don't think it would be appropriate to meet, you know, the leader of the council meet with the opposition leader and leaders of the smaller parties. I don't think that's fair for anyone. I think everyone should have their fair chance to speak to you on a one-to-one basis. So in my experience, and hopefully that's of some use to you, those are my thoughts on this.
I thank you, Councillor Wilcox. I actually had thought about the sort of ideal of one-to-one rather than all together, but that's something
don't
to
have
think
them all
about.
together, Chair. Don't have them all together because it can. You know,
yeah, I'll take your advice on that.
All right, it can detract from what could be a very positive conversation.
Thank you for that input. Councillor Davies, yourself.
Yes, just a question. Does group leaders apply to community councils? And if so, how would you define group leaders within the community council?
No, it doesn't. You don't have groups in community councils. Even if people decide to stand under a political umbrella, as it were, as a community councillor, you don't have formal groups as such. The groups in primary councils are more about entitlement to seats on committees, because with political balance rules, you have to apportion seats on committees according to the political balance on the council. So it's only relevant really in primary authorities, not in community councils.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gareth. Paul, I see your hand there, but Jill beat you to it. So, Jill.
Thank you, Chair. I think it would be a good idea to meet them before the 6 months, to introduce the committee to them. And for them to know that we're here to help if they need any assistance, and just to set out what we expect them to do in their first 6 months, because it's something new. So that's one observation. And then my only other observation is obviously independence. If they form a group, that's fine, and if there's more than 2 of them, that's fine, they'll have a leader, but it's just being aware that accessibility to the standard committee for independent members as well. I think we should give them a fair opportunity to approach the committee as well at some stage during the year.
Thank you, Jill. Before I come to you, Paul, any particular thoughts on that, Gareth, about, because we may be getting down to small numbers for independents now, maybe not, or
it depends if they're a group, as Jill says. I mean, even though they're not politically affiliated, shall we say, right, even independent councillors can actually form themselves into a group, and it only takes 2 of them to form a group for this purpose. I mean, clearly this new duty only applies to group leaders. So if you're still a truly independent councillor on your own, as it were, in the council, this duty won't apply to you. Yeah. So I mean, whether Jill is of a view that we should still meet with though, even though they don't have a group and they don't have a group leader duty, I'm not so sure about that one. I mean, clearly we will pick up the training and we'll include the group leader's responsibility as part of the new induction training for all members. And we'll come back to the training programme later in terms of when we do the induction training and the mandatory code of conduct training. So you know, all of them should have a basic understanding of what the new duties entail. But I take Jill's point that once we've done that, it would be good to get the new group leaders before you, separately or collectively, whatever your preference is, as soon as possible within the 6 months, just to set your stall out, and to make sure that they fully understand what's required of them.
So have the first meeting we're saying here is not so much of an actual meeting of what we're going to have, but as you say, set the stall out, and then, you know, you come back in X number of months or whatever with that letter, so the letter that goes out, or they come into us, and then from there. So very much like an introductory meeting.
I think so.
Okay.
In terms of reports or letters, you know, as Councillor Wilcox has said, you know, some group leaders are more familiar with that process than others. So I wouldn't want to make it too onerous in terms of what you would require from them as a written report. It really could just be a simple update in terms of meetings that they've had within their groups. But again, you can set your stall out, as you say, at that first meeting, and perhaps agree a process that works for both yourselves and the new group leaders.
Lovely, thank you, Gareth. Paul, sorry about that.
Yeah, no, just to say, I think it's quite a helpful document, and the reasonable degree of clarity. I think there's a nice balance in terms of the flexibility, but I think the point about setting the stall out is actually a good one, because although there's flexibility and ability to sort of respond locally, being clear from our point of view that we have a structure in place and we have a structured approach alongside that flexibility, I think that's quite important. I also note, I mean, the Standards Committee is obliged to report on an annual basis. I may have missed it, but what I don't see is if there's any process for if we have any concerns within that annual process. If, for example, we've got a 6-monthly catch up with the group leaders and we have concerns about one particular group. I mean, again, I guess that's for us to decide as an authority, or for the authority to decide, but I don't see anything in there. Is there a reporting mechanism on that basis? The obligation is solely around the annual report.
The annual report is just a summary of the work that you've done in the previous 12 months.
Yeah.
And what you've done to fulfil those duties. If an ethical standards issue comes up, whether it involves group leaders or not, that is something that you would deal with as and when it occurred. You wouldn't wait for an annual reporting process to pick that up. I think if there were concerns about what group leaders, for example, were or were not doing, and maybe there were more and more examples of let's say low-level complaints and resolution protocol complaints from a particular group, then it may well be that you would want to nip those in the bud and get that group leader in at your next meeting for a discussion about what he or she is doing to address that issue. So I would see you picking that up. Any areas of concern you would pick up as you're going along. You wouldn't just wait for the annual report and some sort of reporting mechanism. So no, I think this is an ongoing duty, and you would deal with those as and when they arise.
That makes perfect sense and answers my question. Thanks, Gareth. Thanks, Chair.
Councillor Hourihane, I think you were next. I've seen you there, Richard.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, this is something new in terms of scrutinising minor group leaders. At the moment, we do occasionally scrutinise the leader of the council on various issues, and that works fairly well. But it is a political forum. So is there going to be some sort of protocol when we go forward from April as to how elected members who will serve on the Standards Committee should or shouldn't behave? Because this could then turn, or has been up until now, a fairly independent body into a political body. So could Gareth give some sort of thought to that? I don't want an instant reaction. Gareth, could you give some thought to that?
Well, my instant reaction is this is not politicising Standards Committee or the process. This is not about politics. This is about a collective group. Like I said, independents may not be politically affiliated anyway. They just group themselves together for the purposes of council business. This is just saying that I think it's just another means of promoting high standards of ethical behaviour, where it sort of fills a gap, if you like, between yourselves as a standards committee and individual members. What you've got in between you is the group leader of each of these groups, political or otherwise, and you would expect them to set an example and have some sort of discipline or ethos within the group that promotes those standards. So I don't see that being a political process, and I don't think it shouldn't. And well, perhaps yourself and Councillor Wilcox are a better place to comment than I, but I wouldn't have thought that placed councillors on standards committee in a difficult position either, because this is more of a process for promoting high standards. It's not political.
No, as I say, we've an opportunity occasionally to scrutinise the leader of the council on various issues. At the moment, we have no ability to scrutinise any of the other group leaders.
Yeah, it's a different scrutiny process. What you're talking about there is holding cabinet members to account for the decisions they take and the role they're fulfilling. This is not about personal scrutiny. This is all about ethical behaviour, and how they promote high standards within their group. So it's not the same type of scrutiny where cabinet members and leaders can be called before scrutiny and held to account or challenged in terms of the decisions that they're taking.
Thank you, Chair. Of course, if Gareth's content, I'm content.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Rain. I'm just going to come to Councillor Wilcox. Richard, if you hear me, because I suspect this is a bit of a follow-on from that. So
yes,
Councillor
absolutely,
Wilcox.
Chair, thank you. Just again, just a point of explanation for colleagues. Of course, each major political party, be it Labour, Tory, Lib Dem or Plaid Cymru, have their own ethical standards written into their rule book. So Councillor Hwrhain and I follow the Labour Party rule book and the ethics and standards therein. But in terms of smaller parties, independents, they may not have that. So I think this is a tremendous step forward in holding everyone to account ethically. Politically, we've got our own rules, and if we don't follow them, we're kicked out. Allegedly, but this is for everyone. So this should bring better governance to all and better standards to all. I think that's the rationale behind it, and I do hope that's how it will be seen and taken forward.
Thank you, Councillor Wilcox. Richard, over to yourself.
Yeah, it was just a follow-on from what Paul was saying, really, and that's how do we as a committee judge that they've met their statutory duty? I presume it's sort of testing against the guidance within the statutory guidance, and then if we feel that, and it seems very subjective. It talks about reasonable steps, and that's a subjective test, isn't it? And if we do think that they're falling short, what sanctions have we got? To influence them to actually change their behaviour.
I think that's a really good question, Chair, because when the legislation was first enacted, that was exactly the question that we raised. In terms of how do you identify when a group leader has actually breached this duty, because obviously they've got to take reasonable steps. But at the end of the day, if members of their group don't commit breaches of the code of conduct or serious breaches, is that sufficient of itself? And to a certain extent, I mean, whilst I think the flexibility in the guidance is welcome, it probably doesn't give any greater clarity in terms of how do you establish whether or not they've breached the duty? Because technically, I mean, if we've said they're not liable if one of their group members commits a breach of the code. But what the guidance is clear about is that if they haven't taken reasonable steps to promote high standards within their group, then that could be a breach of the code of conduct on their part, and then opens up the same sanctions as anybody else in terms of breaches of the code of conduct. So I think that was, and as a criticism, I still think that's unresolved, really, even from this guidance. I think it's a very good question. And unless you're getting numerous complaints about behaviour within a particular group, and that group leader is either indifferent or doing absolutely nothing about it, I think it's very difficult to establish that they are or are not breaching this duty. So I think it's there, as Councillor Wilcox says, to really try and encourage people to do more in terms of avoiding these sorts of complaints, if you like. But no, I think it's a very good point, and I don't know what the answer is in terms of, you know, how you would establish an obvious breach of this duty of the code by the leaders of the groups.
I suppose the bottom line, you know, just having that duty in place, you know, influences people to act in a certain way that they wouldn't normally. So that's the big advantage of that duty, isn't it? But when it comes to actually enforcing it, I think, as you say, that's very, very.
I think it's one of those target duties. Well, absolutely right. I think it's there to try and encourage people to behave in a certain way. But in enforcement in practice, I agree with you. I think it's fraught with difficulty.
Thank you all for that and for your input into this. I would perhaps just like to get some sort of a result on this, and obviously we've had sort of several different comments about it, and I know I said looking at it, given them 6 months to try and get settled in and do the training, but I'm picking up what Jill has said there about a bit of an introduction meeting where we can meet them and just say, you know, this is what we want. We don't want to make it too onerous on you. This is what you can expect from us, and this is what we can expect from yourselves. So I've sort of just written down here, sort of 4 months in, to have that little introduction, and this is who we are, and this is what we intend to do, and you know, this is how we'd like you to present that in a non-onerous way on that. And then at the 6 month point, then have the first proper setup where we meet them, and potentially picking up on the steer from the council members amongst you, in, you know, one at a time over a time slot of a few hours. Don't know what people are thinking about that. Did you, as some sort of a way of moving that part forward? Does that seem rather sensible? I don't want to say make it onerous, but I mean, if anyone's got any additional sort of areas they're thinking about, please speak now. Kerry, I see you've got your hand up there.
Is 4 months a little bit too long, and there's only 2 months then for them to get their notes together before they meet us? I know they've got a lot to deal with when they first come in May, but is 4 months a little bit too long, do you think?
To be honest with you, Kerry, I don't know, and I'd have to put that over to either Gareth or our political colleagues here.
What I would suggest, I mean, we'll have to look at your programme of meetings after next May.
Yeah.
Assuming your first meeting won't be until June, July. We can check that for you, but the first, you may decide maybe to invite them to the first meeting. If that's sort of 6-8 weeks into the new council term, we'll have done the induction training, hopefully by then. So, you know, we could pencil it in for the first meeting. But I'll need to check with Sam when the first scheduled meeting is of Standards Committee after May.
I can confirm that the first meeting is the 14th of July.
Okay, I mean, that doesn't seem an unreasonable date, to be honest. It's about 6 weeks after the election.
Yeah, I'm perfectly content with that, Gareth, and obviously to take it from the officers of the council that if they'll be ready for that, it'll save additional meetings, and you know, I'm quite content. Anyone, any thoughts on that? I mean, I'm quite content with that. Do it that way. No.
Yeah.
So I think that's a note for you there, Sam, to invite, and obviously we can invite them to that. Maybe if we can just have have some idea of, we don't want to make this an onerous process, as Gareth has said, but obviously this is just going to be the sort of first introduction to us. Maybe we can give some thought to, the first actual meeting about what we want to, how we want them to present it to us, for a chat. Any thoughts on that, Gareth? I know you said keep it, we don't want it to be an onerous process.
I think the first meeting is very much an introduction, Chair.
Yeah.
To be honest, it's a follow-up in terms of the induction training that we've done. And I personally, I wouldn't go in with any preconceived ideas about what you require and when. I think I would have that discussion with them, because I think in the same way this guidance is flexible, I think you need to be sort of relatively flexible in terms of your reporting requirements. So for the first meeting, I would suggest that you keep it fairly low key, just to introduce yourselves, explain that you will help them as much as you can in terms of meeting their obligations, and then just agreeing a process with them, if you like, that isn't onerous, and that they're comfortable with. So yeah, for the first meeting, I think it's very much an introduction. And then we can sort of set some parameters after that, if you like, in terms of how regularly you meet with them and what sort of information you want from them in terms of what they're doing as group leaders. Just on the point of meetings, I think you mentioned earlier about you would prefer face-to-face meetings, particularly if you're meeting group leaders. Just to confirm, after May, and again as a result of the legislation, what we're hoping, or what we should have in place, is the ability to hold hybrid meetings if necessary, so that we will be allowing members back into the council chamber, back into the meeting rooms, for those who want to come in and have face-to-face meetings, but also with the flexibility for those who are unable to join the meeting face-to-face. They can still dial in remotely. So we've got this hybrid technology now in the council chamber, where we can have a partly Teams meeting and a partly face-to-face meeting, and that could apply to Standards Committee as well after May, if you're all comfortable to resume the face-to-face meetings.
Yeah, I mean, and that's something that each individual member will have to obviously consider for themselves. I don't know what's going to come out on the 25th of March, and what that is, but I'm quite happy for hybrids. It's more for me a sort of the face-to-face. I always find I get better feedback. I think I get better feedback, and you can actually perhaps read into them a little bit more about body language than over a camera, and from that side of it. But I'm quite happy for my part for hybrids. And again, my colleagues here amongst you, you decide. Obviously a little bit nearer the dates, how it's going to run for your personal self, because I would imagine as well, Gareth, there'll be some leaders who won't want to come in and want to do it remotely, and that may not be because of COVID, because of time and all that. I don't know. Yeah,
we're assuming for the purposes of those arrangements there will be no COVID restrictions in place.
Yeah.
What's in the legislation is more about the diversity agenda and people's work-life balance.
Yeah.
So it means if people have got work or childcare or other commitments, they can juggle their council meetings around their other commitments without having to travel significant distances to attend meetings. So it's more about personal convenience and work-life balance rather than any COVID restriction, shall we say. So for that reason, yes, it's down to the preference, if you like, of individual members as to whether they would prefer to come into the council chamber or council meeting rooms face to face, or whether they dial in remotely because it's more convenient.
Right, thank you for that. And maybe that's something that obviously when the Sam sends the invites out, people can decide then, is it?
We're still working up a protocol in terms of how that hybrid multi-location meeting will work. I mean, clearly, because we don't know who's going to come in and who's not going to come in, what we'd have to do is send you all a Teams invitation. But for meeting management purposes, it would be good to know how many of you plan to come in and how many of you plan to dial in remotely beforehand. So we're still working on how we're going to inform members about that, and how you will tell us what your preferences are. I mean, at the end of the day, it may well be something could come up at the last minute, and you'd intended to come in for the meeting, but you can't travel. So yeah, we've got to legislate for that as well. So we're working on those protocols. But yeah, after May, for those of you who want to come back into the building for face-to-face meetings, we will have that facility.
Lovely, thank you for that, Gareth, on that point of it. And you know, that's obviously, as you said, something we're working on, and we will see. So item 8 of the agenda was the draft standards, and I think we've really given that a good airing. If we can have a look at item 9 on the agenda, which is the members' exit survey from there. And he says looking for it. So can I just ask you to lead again on this, please, Gareth, from there?
Well, I think Leanne is on the call, Leanne Rowlands, who's the Democratic Services Manager. Now, what you've got within your slides is the presentation that Leanne did for Democratic Services Committee. I know Jill has seen them because she asked for copies of the slides, but it does link in with something that we've discussed previously in terms of exit surveys and so on. So if you're happy, I'll hand over to Leanne and she can just talk you through this
certainly
this particular presentation.
Over to you, Leanne. The floor is yours.
Thanks, Chair. Would you prefer if I shared my presentation as I'm talking through? Or are you happy
if you
to
want to, that's fine. Yeah,
yeah.
that might just put a bit more reality on it from there.
Okay, can you see my slides now?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, great.
Yes.
Okay. So as Gareth has said, this was prepared after our conversation at the last committee. I took on board the feedback from Jill and the rest of the committee. Then I've been to Democratic Services Committee to talk through some of the requirements around surveys, because there were a number of them this year, to get their feedback, and I'll talk through that at the end as well. And then I was hoping to open it up to the committee if there were any additional questions over and above what has been outlined, then we could include those as well. So the requirements are the exit survey. So we're aiming there to understand the experience of our members, perhaps why they're not choosing to stand again, and identifying opportunities where we could provide better support for members in the future. And this is linked into the participation strategy. So the Local Government and Elections Act 2021 requires each local authority to have a participation strategy in place. Part of the aim of that strategy is to encourage people to stand for election and increase the diversity and representation of communities in Wales. The second survey is the ethical standards exit survey. So this was the one that Jill raised last time that we talked a little bit about. So this is aiming to support the behaviour and standards of elected members. The third one, which is again linked to the participation strategy and that aim to increase diversity. So this is around establishing our current demographic profile of membership within the council. So this would then give us that baseline on equalities and diversity data that we could look at comparatively going forward in future elections. And the last one is the candidate survey for elections 2022. So this again is a legal requirement and used to conduct a survey really around councillors, but also unsuccessful candidates for local and community council elections. So a little bit more detail about each one. I'll try to keep it brief. So the member survey, the exit survey, just thought it'd be useful to try and run through some of the questions so you can get a bit more of a detailed feel for what's included in there. So things around, you know, terms that people have served as councillors, their roles or positions that they've held, if they are choosing to stand for re-election after the current term, if not, why not? Looking to try and find out about what changes or improvements we could put in place to encourage members to continue to stand, what people have enjoyed and least enjoyed about being a councillor, and if there was any additional support or assistance they felt could be used to help them during their time serving. Also then asking a little bit about the induction and training provided to councillors, if there was anything else they felt should have been included. Then a little bit about group support, so whether that support was sufficient to help them operate effectively, if there was anything else they felt should be provided by the group. And then it goes on to have some questions really about unacceptable behaviours linked to standards. So if they witnessed any unacceptable behaviours and there was a list there that would be lifted and linked to ethics and conduct. If they reported the incident at the time, and if not, why not? And then about the process of reporting, so who was it reported to? Were they satisfied with how it was dealt with? And then some more open questions about what could be done to stop or prevent bullying and discriminatory behaviours in the future. This survey would then go on to ask standard equality monitoring questions, and an important note for this is that it would be completely confidential, and any findings that would be shared as an aggregate would be kept anonymous. The ethical standards survey, so this was the one that we talked about last time, and having this tailored to Newport City Council specifically and linked to the further development of standards training for members. Again, the design would be completely confidential, and any returns would be kept anonymous. Thirdly, then the diversity survey. So this has specific questions around protected characteristics under the Equality Act. And this time it would include some around the socio-economic duty, such as whether they've got dependents and their employment status, their housing tenure, etc. And there would also be questions related to the Welsh language, supporting the Welsh Language Act. Again, any responses received would be kept confidential, and any aggregated findings would be anonymised. Then lastly, we would have the candidate survey. So this is around asking prescribed questions that would be standard across the whole of Wales. Previous surveys have been carried out at the last 2 local elections, and these are operated on behalf of local authorities by Data Cymru. Again, completely confidential, and any findings would be anonymised. So some of the challenges that I feel around the surveys really are, there is a large crossover and overlap in some of the areas of questions being asked. I think it'd be quite a bit of survey fatigue maybe for members or candidates, where we're asking for lots of returns aimed at lots of different things with quite similar questions. And I think the challenge would be around then encouraging that response rate to each of them, so that each survey has sufficient responses to be robust and something that we could look on in terms of the data. So if I just go back to the challenges, I think it's worth noting at this point that Democratic Services Committee were in agreement with this. I think one of the bits of feedback that is important to note is around perhaps combining the surveys. So although the Data Cymru survey is operated externally, and that would happen on its own remit really, the other surveys we could look at combining them into one to try and make it as easy as possible for members, and so we're not bombarding them with lots of requirements to fill bits and pieces in. The other bit of feedback that I had from Democratic Services Committee was around perhaps not that useful to ask members around questions around their induction at this point. We're 5 years in, they might not be able to recall as much back 5 years, maybe try and focus it on any recent training they may have had. So the timeline shared with the committee was around reviewing the questions related to the ethical standards with this committee today. The Data Cymru candidate survey will go live on the 28th of March, and that will close late June. That will happen going forward. And then looking to put together a final survey based on Democratic Services feedback and your feedback today, so that would be shared in a report at the end of this month. And that concludes my presentation, Chair.
Thank you for that, Leanne, for the third time. Not sure if that's gone on. So let me open this to the floor, and any comments, thoughts, or input for Leanne in relation to this. Kerry, I see you've got your hands up there.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Really, for that information, I think it's very helpful. Perhaps I'd like you to consider. I've noticed there's no questions there relating to remote attendance, as we were discussing earlier on, and whether that would be more appropriate for new members, particularly with the work-life balance that we were talking about before. I don't know whether you've considered putting something in relation to that. And secondly, a question regarding specific training for members, whether that would be any help to new members. And as a general comment regarding the challenges, this committee also has an issue with response rates, unfortunately, but something we'll have to look at, I suppose, in the round.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kerry.
Before you move on, Chair, just to pick up on the one question about why haven't we put anything in about remote attendance at meetings or remote meetings? Largely because it's now a legislative requirement that members have that personal choice. So, you know, regardless of what people feel about remote meetings or otherwise, as from the 5th of May, we have to have the technology to allow them to do both, whatever their freedom of choice is. So that's why we haven't asked members' views about remote meetings. It's because legally we are now required to provide that facility anyway, whether members use it or not.
Thank you for that, Gareth. Jill.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I can see member fatigue in filling out all of these surveys. I was just wondering, and you know, the Democratic Services Committee about combining, would you do it as an electronic, like Survey Monkey or something similar that was easy, well, easier for members to fill out in their own time?
Yeah, that would be shared bilingually with members so that they can drop in and complete it as and when.
Thank you. Any other comments or thoughts for Leanne?
Just to say, Chair, and to the rest of the committee, I will faithfully complete each and every exit survey.
Thank you very much. And you probably have quite a number to do, I would imagine, Councillor Wilcox.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, and reasons why I'm not standing again. Oh, Mark Drakeford sent me in exile to London. That's the reason.
Thank you.
It would be useful, Chair, just to get committee's views on Leanne's point about, and Democratic Services Committee point about whether you're forgetting the candidate survey, which Data Cymru will do, and that's a separate requirement. You know, once the notice of the elections is published, that, you know, that is something we can't combine with our local survey. But what's the feeling about having, say, a single exit survey combining all of the member support questions, the ethnicity and ethical standards, just in one composite questionnaire?
Excellent idea.
Yeah, I mean, for me, as long as it doesn't get too too heavy with all of them together, I think it is a good idea. Kerry, so you had your hand up there.
I quite agree with you, Gareth. One questionnaire is sufficient as long as it's not too onerous, I think.
Thank you. And are the rest of the colleagues in agreement with that for Leanne? Yeah. Lovely. Thank you very much, Leanne. Yes, you certainly try and combine that and make it into one bite size for our councillors.
Before we move on then, Chair, also sent around with the agenda were Jill's sort of amended questions, if you like. We sent you the ethical standards questions that we circulated as a standards committee years ago. I think Jill helpfully came back with some suggestions of tweaking of those questions, and I think that document was sent out with the agenda papers. It's just a question of whether you're happy with those being the questions that we put in the ethical standards bit of the composite questionnaire.
Yeah, thank you, Gareth. Yes, I thought the question on ethical standards looked familiar, the one we've used in the past. I have to say, and I may not have seen it, Jill's additional comments or questions?
It was the Word document that was sent around with the agenda.
Ah, right,
That
okay.
was the document that Jill produced.
Yeah, right, okay, yeah, I've got that in that case. Richard, while I'm just trying to find this.
Yes, I've been through that. The one comment I would have is that obviously you've got a series of questions, and then at the end you've got a space to elaborate and provide further comments. I think it might be useful if there's some guidance given to refer back to the question that your comments refer to, just to make sure you understand what the comment relates to. And I just wondered if there shouldn't be something more around content and format of training, electronic face-to-face workshop, whether that there couldn't have been something more explicit around that in the actual questions. Those are the points. There was a slight typo as well at question 13, but that was very minor.
Can I just ask a question to the committee then? Although we're asking this of current members, I wonder if it would be useful to ask a similar survey then based on the induction training after the induction training that's coming up post-election, when it's fresh in people's minds.
Yeah, what we would normally do, Leanne, is to have a training questionnaire they fill in on the day, where we ask members just to rate the course, if you like, in terms of the content and presentation and so on. So what we tend to do is do that on the day for each of the sessions, and then we can evaluate the training program then in the light of their immediate response to it, rather than waiting some months down the line.
Leanne, was that sufficient for you?
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, just writing down my notes so I don't forget.
Another size. That's given there. Paul, yeah, I can see you there.
Yeah, I mean, just to say, it seems the amendments look good. The version looks good. The only thing I would say is by its very nature, it's a questionnaire that's aimed at a councillor who's been in post for a while or has had some experience rather than coming in fresh. So we may want to think about at what point we use the questionnaire as well.
Thank you, Paul. Any other thoughts on that? Okay, so, Leanne, sorry.
So I was going to say, obviously we're combining this to be going out over the next month or so. It's going to combine the exit survey, the standards queries, and the information about equality and diversity. I think this one would be over the next month.
So yeah, so this is for the current and for those councillors who are not standing again. So it based on their previous experiences. And then what we're saying is for the new intake of members, we'll get them to fill in a sort of a training evaluation questionnaire when they're being trained, and then maybe some when they've settled into their new roles a bit, then that will be the time to do a more comprehensive survey of the new members based on these questions.
Yeah, I'd be content with that. Everyone doesn't appear to be no one's got their hand up, so yeah, thank you for that, Gareth. And have you got that, Leanne?
Great, thank you.
On that side of it, I know Sam will have it for the minutes from there. Okay, great. Thank you for that, everybody. Moving on down the agenda, basically item 10, which is our members induction. Is someone speaking on this, Gareth, or
same again? I think Leanne will do a similar presentation. These are the slides that Leanne presented to Democratic Services Committee on the members induction training
Great.
program.
Great.
Apologies, I'm just finding the right slides. Will be a second. Okay, hopefully you should be able to see
Thank you, Leanne.
my shared screen now.
Yes, I can see it.
Yes, there we go.
Yes.
Okay, great. So yeah, this is to run through the plan for member induction for post-election this year. Just a little brief outline of the legislation and guidance. There are some helpful frameworks that WLGA have developed for members in Wales. So this is the outline of a curriculum as guidance for what should be considered when developing programmes for localities. There's also the development framework for members, which is their competency framework, again on the subjects which should be covered not only as part of the induction but also the ongoing member development, and the Wales Charter for Member Support and Development to look at improving practice, helping members to develop their skills and knowledge. So the induction principles really are around less is more, so trying to give the information required at the right time, and understanding that particularly for newly elected members, you know, this is a busy period, there's a lot of information coming through, trying to focus on what they need at that particular time. Looking at it from a member perspective, so focusing on again their experience and how to help them become confident and effective in their role through that support. Also looking at making it individualised, so thinking about each member's role and how that might be tailored to suit them. So this is dependent on cabinet member roles on different committees and panels. Trying to make the training as engaging and interactive as possible. You know, dare I say it right now, it's nothing worse than death by a PowerPoint. So trying to make it as interactive and exciting as we can. As and when, so again, this is around induction, but also trying to think of longer term. You know, what is the plan beyond that induction period, and how can we make sure that members can drop in and access the information that they need when they need it. And making use of effective trainers. So some of these are our subject matter experts that work for the council. So people like Gareth, our licensing, planning experts, but also then looking for some topics to bring in external support and delivery with us the most appropriate format. Then around the methods of delivery, so these are some of the things that you've already touched on today, committee, so making sure that it is available in a number of formats so that it's suiting that individual member, but also suiting the topic, the discussion, and supporting that added value that comes perhaps from sharing experience and best practice. So we are looking to produce an electronic induction pack this time around, so it's something that members will have access to throughout the 5 years, and the aim would be then to update it as and when with new information. There is that room for formal training, so as I've said, sometimes with external providers, sometimes with our own experts. There are a lot more e-learning modules than we've had in previous years. I think it's important to make or take advantage of some of the changes that we've experienced over the past 2 years. You know, some of them have been very positive, and I think one of the benefits of e-learning modules is they're always available to members. So should they want to go back and review something at any time during the 5 years, they could go back and have a refresh of the information. There still is a place for facilitated workshops, as you were saying earlier. So sometimes that is the best place to create space for conversation and engaging people in that way. And again, that mixture of internal and external provision for the trainers. Also looking at the experiential learning, so opportunities for members to learn from observation, and coaching and mentoring, again, particularly useful for any newly elected members. So key dates for this year: Thursday the 5th of May is the polling day, but the verification and count is not going to happen until the next day, Friday the 6th of May. This is in line with almost the whole of Wales. I think it's only the Isle of Anglesey that's choosing to do the verification and count on the same day this year. The next big date then is the annual general meeting. So you'll notice that the verification and count is on the Friday. We'll then have a full week and 1 day before we carry out or conduct the annual general meeting. That's a really tight time scale, given that we know probably will be quite a number of members choosing not to stand again this year, so there'll be brand new members to induct. A lot of important stuff needs to happen. Gareth mentioned that we will be doing the first hybrid meeting at the AGM, so making sure that members have the right equipment and kit to be able to log on to the meeting. They've got access with accounts and they can get online and do what they need to do. And also that they've got their guidance and understanding on how to join and participate in that first meeting. So I think that's going to be a hectic week. There'll be lots of things to do. So that core induction and preparation for the AGM is really important. The first month then we'll look to open that up to support members around key legislation they need to understand, and also for those with committee roles, making sure that they're prepared and have that overall understanding of what will be needed there. Then the first quarter we look to open it up wider again, so thinking about other legislation and policy and skills to support the community work. And then further beyond that, additional legislation, anything else they might need to be aware of, and again, community work and skills and development. So the first week, again, I can't emphasise the point enough really. It is about ICT induction, understanding the code of conduct and the ethics and standards expected, a general introduction to the role and local government, some level of orientation, with a somewhat of an assumption that people will be in the offices at that time, and also the governance, really important in that first week around the Constitution. And then lastly, the general meeting participation, so that they are fully prepared for the first meeting of the year. Then the first month, as I said, would be an introduction to service areas, looking at some of the legislation like Equality and Diversity, Welsh language, Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, and then preparation for committees, so planning, licensing. I've greyed out some of the scrutiny committees, simply because we're looking at the structural changes happening with the council, and perhaps then they would lend themselves to a change of the structure of the scrutiny committees going forward. But however that would be worked out, we would provide appropriate training and guidance for members. Then provide some support on chairing skills, widen up the legislation to include safeguarding, and then more in-depth training on scrutiny and effective scrutiny membership. Then I think the second quarter we'd look at preparation for the budget cycle, so really important to cover Treasury management and budgeting, Social Care and Wellbeing Act, more on governance and audit, data management, and then some support around personal safety, self-care and social media to support members in their role. So in total, I think it probably looks like a lot. There's 32 modules in total, which I think, it does seem to be a lot. However, 16 of these are mandatory, but only six of those mandatory modules are only for members appointed to certain committees. So this is where the individualised plan comes into play, and making sure it's the right information for the right member at the right time. And actually split across the timeline, it isn't as intensive, but again, just emphasising the fact that first week it is a commitment, and we are going to need members to be engaged and looking to be involved with that guidance and support in preparation for the AGM. We are trying to offer modules on as many platforms as possible, so induction packs and the signposting then for more information like the WLGA. There's 14 e-learning modules which will be via the All Wales Academy and the WLGA, and they're just being going through final sign-off at the moment. And then we've got up to 22 modules that we could run as workshops. I think it's important to note that, you know, there are lots of experts within the council that have done this many times, albeit we know that some of the legislation has changed for this year. And of course, where possible, offering things on a face-to-face basis, again, COVID rules permitting. That concludes my presentation.
Thank you for that, Leanne. Most informative indeed from there. Gareth, was this, obviously this is what the future is going to be. Are we commenting on this now, or is it just for information, or?
It's mainly for information. I mean, clearly of what's of more interest for this committee is the ethical standards training that we'll undertake in the first week or so. But I think it was important you saw that in context, really, in terms of the overall programme of training that we're having to deliver and how comprehensive that is. And also the commitment in terms of time, both for officers and members during those first couple of weeks. Well, 6 days effectively between the election count and the AGM. So, you know, it'll be a busy time. Lots of commitment on both sides. In terms of the ethical standards training, we haven't yet seen the final version of that e-learning module that was being developed via WLGA. That will obviously be available online for members to undertake. But as Leanne said, we envisage this to be a workshop session in terms of mandatory ethical standards training. So there will be a face-to-face session or sessions in the council chamber for the new cohort of elected members. There will be the facility to dial in remotely, because obviously with hybrid technology now we can do that. But again, the preference would be to have a sufficient number of members in the council chamber on a workshop basis, because as Leanne said, we found from previous experience that's more beneficial in terms of that dialogue and shared experience and so on. Particularly if new councillors are undertaking, if new councillors are undertaking the training for the first time alongside other councillors who can share their experiences with them, if you like, in terms of how it applies in practice. So the intention is to have the ethical standards training as a workshop session or sessions, you know, within the first few weeks for the new members. We can think about the programme later. I know with previous induction training sessions, the chair of standards committee sometimes has attended just to introduce himself or herself and to explain the role of standards committee. And again, you'd be welcome to participate in the training if you felt that was useful. But yeah, at this stage, it's largely for your information, just so you're happy in terms of what's being programmed there, and we can come back to you more on the detail later on. But even once that e-learning module is completed, what we will deliver locally is something that's perhaps a bit more adapted to our local procedures. It's a bit like our governance arrangements. You know, everything is slightly different in each of the councils, so it needs to be directed specifically at what happens locally. So we'll come back to you more on the detail later, but if anyone's got any general observations or questions, then we're happy to pick those up.
Thank you, Gareth, and certainly from the chair's point of view, you know, if we're going to do a job, we'll do it properly, and I'll certainly be more than happy to come along and have a little bit of input on that session, representing the standards committee from there. So if that's some detail I can pick up with you later on. Let me open this up to my colleagues here. Any comments, or any thoughts, or anything to say? Paul, well done.
This is a really helpful presentation, very clear as well. It's nice to see our element of the standards elements up front, you know, in the early days, but it's also quite informative to see the sheer amount of material that councillors have to absorb. It's gives a sense of perspective. But no, very clear and very helpful. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Paul. Gary?
I'm more than happy to come with you to the
super job.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. That's something we'll sort out with Gareth a little nearer the date in that case then, but thank you for that. Okay, as I can't see any other hands, I think we're just about done for this evening. Excuse me a moment. I think we're just about done for this evening. So can I just say thank you for your time. Oh, Councillor Wilcox, sorry.
Chair, if you would indulge me, as these are going to be the last ever words I speak and are recorded for Newport City Council, if I can thank you. I've really enjoyed being part of this committee, and my thanks to the other members, both independent and political. I think, you know, some really good work's been done, and particularly when we've had some challenging things to mete out. I've enjoyed being part of this group particularly. I'd like to thank the officers of this committee, all officers who have supported it, but I'm sure you'll indulge me for singling out two officers. Anne Jenkins, who has been an absolute treasure for the 18 years of my role as councillor, cabinet member, and then finally leader of the council. She's been superb in support. And finally, you have an absolute gem in Gareth Price, Head of Law and Standards. He is one of the outstanding members of council, officers of council across Wales, I would say, indeed across the UK. So Gareth, my personal thanks to you. You were an absolute steer in everything that I had to do, and I wish you a great deal of happiness for the future, particularly when one day you do get a new life and you don't have to turn up in Newport on a Monday morning. So diolch yn fawr iawn pawb. Thank you all very much. Yep. And goodbye Newport.
Thank you, Councillor Wilcox, for that. Yes, and I'm just ticking off the names that you've mentioned there. Yeah, thank you, you know, for everybody tonight. But you know, and Sam and Leanne, and of course Gareth as the other officer of the council. And thank you to everybody else. And look forward to seeing you at our next meeting, which I think you said was 11th of July, Sam.
There is one scheduled beforehand for April. Let me double check the date.
Just on that point, Chair, there is one in April, as you say. Yeah. This is an additional meeting. It's up to you whether you feel you wish to meet. I mean, we may have an update then in terms of training, but it's up to you whether you want to go ahead with that meeting or
that's fine. Yeah, thank you, Gareth, for that. I know that this meeting was an additional one we put in because we were hoping to have lots of really good stuff. Not that we haven't already. And so this was the additional one. I'm quite content in keeping to the programme that we have and going for the April meeting, and what my colleagues think and feel on that.
In that case, I'll come back for an encore, Chair.
You won't be able to, Councillor Wilcox. You've had your encore now.
No, I don't know if I'll be available. So But anyway, thank you.
Thank you. And looking at thank you, Councillor. Looking at the sort of general nods around the room, yeah, I think we'll go ahead with the April meeting. If you would, please, Gareth and Sam.
Yeah, that's fine. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you all. Have a good evening, everybody. And Gareth, can I just ask you just to stay on a moment or two?
Yes.
For a quick chat. Thank you all.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night now.
Bye.
Good night.